All right, we're going to be in Genesis 23. Genesis 23 tonight. I hope no one's tired of Genesis. I just realized while we were about to start here that we started Genesis when I first got here. So we've been in Genesis for about a year and a half, and we're only on chapter 23. But in my defense, we've taken some breaks here and there, and we've done little things like a series on heaven or on spiritual gifting. So just hoping you're not tired of Genesis, but also that hopefully you remember some of the things we've talked about over the last year and a half. But today we're going to be looking at Abraham, of course. And Abraham's time in Genesis is going to start coming to a close before we start looking at Isaac and Jacob. But before we get started, a quick question for you. Have you ever entered into a business deal with another believer? Did you get that deal in writing, or was it based on someone's word or a handshake? This could be a touchy subject, couldn't it? You know, when Katie and I were getting married, we wanted pictures taken of our wedding and things like that. And we had a friend who was in the youth group with us. She was an aspiring photographer. We asked her if she'd be willing to do it. She said yes. We didn't get anything in writing. And she took photos of the ceremony, but not the reception. And that was a tough pill to swallow, you know. We assumed that it would be for the reception as well. But, you know, we never, I guess, indicated that it should be the reception also. And because we didn't have anything in writing, when she expected payment afterwards, you know, what were we to do? You know, we ended up, we were more immature believers back then, and so we kind of fought it a little bit. We shouldn't have done that. But in the end, we did pay her because, you know, that was the right thing to do. But one thing I learned was to always get a business deal in writing. Now, this isn't to express distrust of the other person. Doing business with the person is already showing tons of trust already. It's actually an act of love, I've come to learn. You know, you're showing that you don't want to let the person down, that you're going to come through for them on your end, and you're willing to put that into writing, to let them hold you accountable to it. And lastly, when we conduct any business deal among believers, we should bend over backwards to make sure that it doesn't come, between us. We don't want anything to break our relationship that Christ has secured by his blood. Anything here on earth, isn't as important as what Christ has done on the cross. For married couples, we say that what God has brought together, let no man separate. Well, that should also apply to our fellowship with other believers. God's brought us together through, his Son. We shouldn't let that be torn apart by anything else. Now, sometimes this may mean sacrificing some of the bottom line, just like Katie and I needed to do in our situation. Again, it took us a while to learn this, and I don't know that our relationship with our friend really survived that ordeal because, again, we weren't perfect in that situation at all. But again, really, what does it matter? Anyway, our treasures are in heaven, not on earth. Still, I could give an in-depth lesson on this, but that's not the point. It's part of this chapter, but not the full point. So let's look at God's Word. Let's read through chapter 23. It says, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land. And he said to them, "If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place." Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in at the gate of his city, "No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that it is in. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead." Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land. "But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there." Ephron answered Abraham, "My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place by the Hittites. All right. So we had just come off Genesis 22. And remember that Genesis 22 is just the climax of Abraham's faith in God. He was willing to sacrifice Isaac, his only son. And after that, Abraham will start again to fade from Genesis. But there's a few more things about him that are important for us to learn from. Now, the event we just read, it may seem kind of unimportant, and probably could have been summed up in just a few sentences. But it's given full treatment because it's an act of faith. In fact, it is a rather outstanding act of faith. Look at verses 1 and 2 again. It gives us that Sarah lived 127 years, and she dies in Kiriath Arba. So in these first two verses, we see her age. And so this means that she was in Isaac's life for about 37 years. From the point of Isaac being born to her death, 37 years have passed. And an interesting thing to note is that Sarah, in the Bible, Sarah is the only one whose age and death are reported in the Scriptures. Her death takes place at Kiriath Arba. Now this is interesting. Look back at Genesis 22, verse 19. Look at the end of that verse. Where does it say that Abraham lived? Beersheba. Now look at Genesis 22, verse 2. Look at the end of that verse. What does it say Abraham did? Sorry, 23, verse 2. My bad. 23, verse 2. What does it say that Abraham did? Huh? Yeah, he went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So the picture that we're getting here is that Abraham and Sarah may have lived in separate locations. Now, there's possibilities for this, and I'm going to name them all, and then a little bit later I'm going to eliminate only one of them because we don't have enough information to eliminate all of them. But here's all the possibilities that could have happened. So first, after chapter 22, about 20 years have passed. And so Abraham could have settled in Beersheba in chapter 22 for a little while and then came back to Kiriath Arba. That's possibility number one. Possibility number two, they may have started to settle a little bit from their constant traveling that they've done throughout their whole life and began to cultivate two separate properties. Abraham in Beersheba, Sarah in Kiriath Arba. He oversaw one, she oversaw one. That's possibility number two. Number three, Sarah may have been just merely taking a trip and ended up passing away in Kiriath Arba. Okay, possibility number three. Number four, some people have floated this. Maybe Sarah was angry at Abraham for almost killing their son in Genesis 22. And so she might never have wanted to see him again. That's possibility number 4. So we're going to look at this chapter, and we're going to eliminate one of those to see what's going on here. So Kiriath Arba has the second name it shows of Hebron in verse 2. She dies at Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron. Hebron was the original name for this city. However, by the time that Moses is writing this, Arba was one of the Anakim. So it's a person named Arba. Okay, the Anakim were the giant race. Okay, generations from now comes Goliath. So the Anakim, they were considered giants. Arba was the person who took possession of this city, Hebron, and he changed the name to Kiriath Arba. Kiriath literally means city. I'm not going to spell it right off the top of my head, so ignore that part, but it means city. So it literally means the city of Arba. Changed the name because he conquered it, and it was his. Quickly pop over to Joshua 21. Joshua 21. Verse 11. Joshua 21, verse 11. It says, they gave them Kiriath Arba, Arba being the father of Anak, being the descendant of Anakim, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah, along with the pasture lands around it. So here we see that during the time of conquest under Joshua, Hebron is still called Kiriath Arba. But over time, when the Israelites came into full possession of the promised land, they changed the name back to Hebron, which means city of treaty. Okay? So that's the difference in names there. We have Kiriath Arba in Genesis 23. We see it again in Joshua 21. That's eventually what became known as Hebron. And so Abraham comes to mourn and weep for Sarah. Mourn means to bewail, to beat one's breast, to lament in the Hebrew. He had true and sincere sorrow. Okay, he felt this loss deeply. And after a period of grief, Abraham knew that he had to attend to Sarah's burial. Look at verses 3 and 4. And back in Genesis 23, verses 3 and 4. Abraham rose up from before his dead and went to the Hittites, asked for a burial place. Now the custom was to bury the dead within a day. Okay, we have the possibility to wait a period of time. They needed to do it in a day. They didn't have embalming. Okay, they didn't have ways to preserve the body. And the body starts to decay pretty quickly. So he had to accomplish this task of securing a grave right away. And so he goes to the Hittites. Now, why do you think that Abraham didn't want to bury Sarah in his ancestral land back in Mesopotamia? It's a long journey. They haven't lived there for how many years now? Over about 75 at least, if not more, 95. And he's promised a certain chunk of land, isn't he? God promised him land. So yeah, he didn't live there anymore. It's a long journey to get back there. He hasn't lived there since Genesis 12. He, like anyone, would want her grave to be closer to where he lived. And very likely he is remembering the promise that he had been given by God. So if God didn't give him this promise of land, do you think Abraham, who did not own any property any land up to this point, do you think he would have bought this property? It's speculation at best, but probably not. Probably not. If God didn't promise him the land that this burial site was located on, why would Abraham pursue this site? But again, this land was promised to him. He knew that his descendants would one day possess this land. And so I think he wanted his wife to be buried on this land. Abraham calls himself a sojourner and a foreigner. A sojourner means that has a permanent dwelling, but no property in the form of land. And a foreigner is a stranger in a strange land, possessing no property and having no fixed place to live. And so Abraham calls himself both because he is both at different times. Sometimes he settles down and stays for a bit, but sometimes he gets back up and wanders around. So he seeks a gravesite to bury Sarah, and it says, did you notice this? He says, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. Did you notice that? What do you think that means? This isn't a out of sight, out of mind type of thing. In the Hebrew, I think this is just a way of saying I just want to bury my wife. Okay, out of my sight is just to say I need a burial place. So it's more of a colloquialism that's preserved for us in the Hebrew more than anything else. So, Yeah, so that translation just understood that out of my sight just meant he wanted to bury her, and so they're just like, we don't even need that in there. So, yep. Yeah, so sometimes translations are trying to help you understand exactly what's being said, and so they're like, the idea of this is he just wants to bury. So, look at verses 5 and 6. The Hittites answer Abraham. Do they seem reluctant or obstinate? No. What do they call him? A prince of God. See, they showed generosity, and it seems like they're speaking sincerely. They're ready to give any of their grave sites to him, even the choicest of their tombs. And the word Prince of God, they understand that he has this high station, this relationship with God, that he's been blessed by God. Now they call God in this verse Elohim. So they don't have a personal understanding of God, rather than calling him by his name, which has been used already here. They call him just Elohim. They recognize his divinity, but they don't recognize his personal relationship, or a personal relationship with him. But still, they describe Abraham in this way. It shows that they knew him and that he had spent some time there. Okay? You don't just walk around calling anyone Prince of God. That's a high station for these people. Look at verses 7 to 9. Abraham acknowledges the graciousness and kindness of the Hittites. What does he do to show this? He bows down. Yeah. The literal Hebrew of this phrase, the literal Hebrew of this is as if there's like this weight on him that he's bowing down before them. So he's showing this respect to them. And he says to them, if you are willing that I should bury my dead. Saying, if you are willing, is literally translated as, if it be with your souls. Okay? The obvious meaning is, if this is agreeable to you. And goes on to name a specific place owned by Ephron. Now, Abraham knew Ephron. It's pretty hard to just pick a random name out of a hat and for him to be present, right? And not only is it hard to pick a random name out of a hat to know that he's present, but to know that he has a choice burial site that you want to have. So he obviously knew Ephron, who he was, what property he owned, and the exact location of the cave that he wanted to bury Sarah in. What does this show? He checked it out. I mean, he knew, right? I'm trying to underline this point. It shows that Abraham had to have spent time in this area before. So, of those 4 options that I gave you of why they were living apart, one of them couldn't have been that she was angry with Abraham. Okay, Abraham wasn't present for Sarah's death, maybe, as we see here in the Bible. But he must have been living there before. Okay, Sarah wasn't angry with him and just saying, we are never going to spend time together again for the next 20 plus years. No, they saw each other often. He lived with her. He knew that area. He knew the people there. Those people knew him. The location of this cave, well, and let me underline this point one more time. Sometimes the reason I gave you that option is because some scholars believe that that's what happened. And sometimes I just want to say, if you just read the Bible, you would see that this option isn't a viable option. But there's a disconnect sometimes between scholars who are like trying to come up with plausible theories, and they just kind of divorce it from what's in the Bible. So that's why I'm pointing and underlining this. Let's just read the Bible, and you'll get from there exactly what's going on. Okay, so not to belabor that point too much. The location of this cave is at the end of Ephron's field. This would readily lend itself to being purchased because it wouldn't break up his property. But Abraham didn't want any favors. He was ready to pay the full price. Let's look at verses 10 and 11. It says, Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites of all who went in at the gate of his city. And he basically says, why don't I just give this to you for free? So, where was Ephron? He was sitting with the Hittites. He was listening to everything that was said. The end of verse 10 says that they were at the city gate. Okay, the men of the town would usually gather there, and that was where all business transactions were done in the ancient world, even up to and through Jesus' day. So this whole transaction was being carried out in the hearing of the Hittites, and thus it was an official piece of business, was fully attested to by the witnesses, and was put into record. Look at Ephron's response in verse 11. How would you describe that response on the face of it? Pretty generous, right? He's going to offer it to Abraham for free. That's a pretty great thing. We'll get to what happens next in a second. But at first, he's going to offer it to him for free. He addresses Abraham respectfully, and again, seems to reject Abraham's offer to pay for the cave. Instead, he says he'll give it to him, and backs up his offer by saying that there are witnesses to it. He says, in the sight of the sons of my people, I'll just give it to you. Go ahead and bury your dead. Again, some scholars point out that this could be interpreted as an empty gesture. A man in that culture would offer a gift, but not expect the person to take it. It was meant, they say, to establish kind of goodwill between them as they go forward in this negotiation or in this business transaction. And so we're going to see a different thing happen in a little bit. But in any case, Abraham just rejects this offer of the free gift. Look at verses 12 to 13. Abraham again shows respect for this people. Abraham bows down before the people of the land, and he said, No, I will pay the price of this field. He's even more intent about honestly purchasing this property. Why do you think this is? If someone came up to you and said, I will give you this house for free, would you sit there and say, No, I want to pay you for it? Why do you think you would say, No, I want to pay you for it? You'd feel it was yours. Exactly. Yep. Anyone else who heard of this happening, what would they think? Yeah, probably crazy. But no, I think there's a few reasons here. Okay, one, Abraham probably doesn't want any ill will with these people, right? Getting this piece of property for free could create some ill will. If someone gave, well, we have the parsonage, but let's say someone's like, here's our house, and we're like, okay. Other people would be like, well, why didn't I get a free house? Or what makes that person so special? Okay, Abraham doesn't want any ill will. Two, he probably doesn't want this to come back to haunt him. Okay, imagine finding out later that someone is slandering him behind his back, saying that he leveraged the death of his wife to steal a piece of land. Okay? We'd hope that wouldn't happen, but sin is sin, and we're all... And they could take it back. You heard us wrong. I wasn't really giving it to you for free. And 10 years from now, I want it back, yeah. And finally, this land was already gifted to Abraham by God. It was gifted to his descendants by God. If he would have received this gift from Ephron that had already been gifted by God, it could have called into question whether God's gift was true and valid. And so we come back to our short lesson at the beginning of this time, which is why I highlighted it. It's always better to have a business deal in writing. It's an act of love. It's an act of accountability. It shows integrity. Look at verses 14 and 15. Ephron answers Abraham. He doesn't ask to be paid. He merely suggests its probable worth, but then adds that such a sum is basically just pennies between them. How much does he ask for? Or say, what is this amount between us? 400 shekels of silver. I'm just going to put shekels as an S and silver is an S. So 400 SS. All right. That would have been about $260 in that day. Okay. Hear my reasoning on that. It would be upwards of $30,000 to $40,000 today. Okay? But I tried to look this up. I couldn't find any tool that would figure out inflation all the way back to 3,000 to 4,000 BC. But I was able to track inflation from 1700 on. Okay? So the value of $260 in 1700 increased to $18,781.58 today. That's a 7,123% increase. Now, I am guessing that my 30 to 40,000 estimate is probably way under than what it would be back in 3,000 to 4,000 BC. Okay, I'm guessing on the low side. So Ephron went from how about free to how about an arm and a leg. Okay, this could be again a negotiation tactic. And I think scholars are right to kind of see this in what he's doing. He wasn't expecting the first offer to be accepted, and then he kind of claims a different price that was probably too expensive, and so the next step that should happen in between them is to land on something in the middle. Okay, Abraham should start negotiating, Ephron should start negotiating, and they should say, okay, this is what we settle on. Does Abraham do that? What's he say? What happens in verse 16? He pays it. He pays it. He wouldn't accept free. He won't negotiate. He goes straight for this. That's what Abraham does. He pays the full amount. He shows that he is above such a thing as haggling or driving a shrewd bargain. He has come to a place where he's just willing to get this burial site. He's not thinking about money. He's thinking about his wife. And I think he pays probably just an insane amount. He lets Ephron take advantage of him. He pays the amount. He even uses the current rates of the merchants, it says, to show that he is completely above board. How do you think Ephron and the Hittites reacted to this? They probably were surprised that he was honest, that he was generous. I imagine they were all those things. And I bet they all thought that Ephron was walking away with, just the best deal. But now, no one would be able to question his integrity. No one would call him dishonest, would call him a thief, would call him greedy, would call him shrewd. The land was his, and people would probably come to his defense if his ownership or character was ever in question. So they conclude the transaction in verses 17 and 18. The field of Ephron and Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites before all who went in at the gate of the city. I've never bought land before, but I'm sure those of you who have, you've had a survey done. You know exactly what's in that piece of land that you're buying. That's what they're showing here. This is what the land is. This is exactly what's in that land. And here's the business deal and those who can attest to it. So those two verses are very much kind of legal type verses. And where was this land east of? Does it say? East of Mamre. I don't know if that's the exact pronunciation, but I won't make you pronounce it either. This was the burial place that was near as possible to his place of residence, a place that he had known since Genesis 14. If you go back there and look at Genesis 14, it talks about how he was by the oaks of Mamre. So that piece of land and everything in it was his. So we see that there were plenty of witnesses to this as well. Again, Abraham found a place for her burial that was within the land promised to him and his descendants after him. So buying this land was an act of faith. The promise wasn't fulfilled yet, but he looked forward to when it was. And he said, this is ours, and this is where we'll be buried. And then verses 19 to 20, it says that Abraham buried his beloved wife. So we have a few lessons from this chapter. First, we see a testimony of faith in the face of loss. When we are going through the death of a loved one, our faith in God guides how we act. Abraham looked for a piece of land that was in the promised land that God gave him. People will see the strength and character of our faith. Second, our witness will be tied to how we act in regards to money. And the question we have to ask ourselves each time is my decision based on my love of God or my love of money? Now, throughout this whole chapter, I don't want to give the wrong impression that we shouldn't make sure that we're making wise business dealings, okay? I just wanted to share what was happening in this chapter. But the basic question that we come down to, no matter what's going on, am I making this decision because of my love of God or my love of money? And third, we must be careful to uphold our integrity and witness. Sometimes this may mean, like Abraham here, being taken advantage of by worldly standards. Sometimes it may mean standing up for what is fair and just, though. I'm not going to give you one or the other because situations, you have to use the wisdom that God gives you. Either way, again, our motivation is God, not money. Any questions on chapter 23? All right, hope you know this chapter a little bit better now by the end of it. And we'll continue in Genesis next week, Genesis 24, okay? One thing I'm going to ask for you all, for myself, be in prayer for me as I'm kind of entering into my next phase of my Doctor of Ministry work. I'm going to be doing my thesis project specifically, and then I have to type up all the chapters related to it. It's about 150 or so pages total to 200. They said some people have gone up to 400. I probably won't go that. I'm hopefully not that long-winded. But yeah, just be in prayer for me during this next season. My goal, my intent is to finish all of that by this fall. And so I could be using prayers just for wisdom, for perseverance and all that jazz. And some people have asked, what's next after my degree? Rest. No, but some people have been, what do I hope to get out of this degree? And my answer is that I'm already getting out of it what I hope to get out of it. My master's degree that I got, Master's of Divinity, was all very theoretical. Here's all this knowledge, but not necessarily how to practically put it into use. And that's why I'm in this Doctor of Ministry program. This is all about practical ideas and how can you live out what you know as a pastor. And so things that I've been doing already here has been coming out of this degree. So that's what I'm getting out of it already. And hopefully it's been a beneficial thing for this church as well. So just wanted to share that with you as well. So, okay, thank you. And let's go have cake and ice cream. All right.